Hey, good morning, and glad to see you here for the Collective Church online experience. Hope that you've had an incredible weekend and appreciate you hanging with us for a little bit this morning. And we're finishing up, not finishing up, but we're continuing our journey through James. We're going to be today in James chapter 3, verses 1 through 12, looking at what the title above the passage in my Bible says, Taming the Tongue, looking at the way that we use what we say. And so the idea of taming, like when I look up online, like the easiest animals to tame, the hardest animals to tame, there's all these gaming references that come up. And there's also more of the idea of domestication. And it is difficult to kind of nail down by the way that they kind of talk through it. But I even saw something somewhere that tigers and elephants are really hard to tame. And even though you see them in circuses or you see them in shows, that it's not a true domestication or taming. It's really more of putting them in an environment where for that short period of time, they will do something that is required of them. It's not like dogs and cats, the same kind of domestication. Zebras were really, really hard. I used to dream about riding a zebra and how amazing it would be to ride a zebra. And then this is no shock, but sharks apparently are really hard to tame. I can understand just with that instinct, but a lot of sources pointing to the easiest animals to tame are ones that can exist off of vegetation, that are highly adaptable, that can have large litters throughout the year, and all these different specifications. So I really learned more about domestication and taming than I intended to. But what I really wanted is I wanted someone to tell me, hey, this animal is horrific to tame. And one of the ones that I saw that was kind of universal is the rhinoceros. Not an animal that is going to be tameable. There's just no way that a rhino is going to be able to be domesticated. It is an animal that is not built to be tamed and domesticated. And when I think about a rhino, I think about just literally it taking just violence and drama and just the whole. I even think a herd of rhinos is called, I think it's called a crash. So even that just brings just this idea of what rhinos do and how they wreck shop and do all that kind of stuff. So we're going to be looking at taming the tongue today, and I want to read this out to you because we're going to be in James chapter 3. Now, if you want to follow along, I'm reading out of James chapter 3, verses 1 through 12 in the English Standard Version. In the resources that you have there on the streaming platform that we're using, there's a place for you to be able to find a Bible as well. And you can look up James 3, chapter 1 through 12. You can look at your phone. If you have the Bible app, you can Google it. So this is what it says. It says, "Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness." Now, remember who James is writing this to. He is writing this to churches that, as the church has expanded out of Jerusalem, as it has moved out through persecution, through expansion, through people moving, he is writing this in a way because there is evidence that what is happening in the church is not what the church was supposed to be built upon, that it is not the church that it's supposed to be. Therefore, he is using this letter, this epistle, to be able to bring behavior back into the middle, into what it was intended to be. And so there were actually a lot of people during this time that liked being called rabbi because it was teachers were a place of status, teachers were a place of honor, and people literally wanted to be called rabbi because of everything that came with it. And so because of that, there were some people that were considered false teachers, that were considered poor teachers, that were considered not living up to the standard of teachers. And if you think about the fact that you moved away from the central part, if you moved away from Jerusalem, if you're moved away and getting away from the things of the church, false teachers, bad teachers, people that were not intended to be teachers, all of a sudden that becomes really, really scary. And the way that we teach primarily, especially in this day, was orally. You used your mouth, you used your tongue, you spoke, and you taught. So, not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. if you think about that, it's like, man, if you are an actual teacher, like if you fulfill the definition of what this is talking about teachers, about who is a leader of the church, there's this idea there that we need to be very careful because of what's happening in this passage about the way that we use our speech, with the way that we talk, with the taming of the tongue. Now, that idea is because it talks about tongue, it kind of introduces itself actually saying the word tongue in verse 5. It's literally talking about the tongue that is in your mouth. But really, the idea of taming the tongue, like it is what we are to look at in this, because it is the way, like you use the lips and you use the teeth and you use the tongue to actually form letters. Like you cannot say T or D without using the tongue. You can try it now. You really can't say T or D without using the tongue. Like it literally helps us form the letters that form our language, that form the basis of our communication. But this is something that when we think about the actual tongue, what we are looking at is, and we'll look at this later on the thing, but the tongue is directional. It's not the engine. The engine is the invisible. The engine is the mind. You know, if we're to love God with our heart, soul, mind, and body, the mind is a part of that, and that is the engine. Matthew even says this. Matthew 12:34 says, "You brood of vipers," this is Jesus speaking, "how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." The heart being the centrality of who we are as a person. It makes up the will, it makes up the mind, it makes up all that. It's not talking about the actual organ. So out of the heart, out of the invisible, it says that the mouth speaks, the tongue speaks. So as we are looking at this, we know that it spends one verse of being out like, teachers, be very, very careful. Then verse 2, "For we all stumble in many ways." So it's not like, hey, listen, teachers, be careful, but everyone else, you kind of have a pass. No, we all stumble in these ways. And that word picture, that idea there of stumble, it's not like this fatal fall that happens. It's literally just like getting tripped up. It's like keeping you from kind of effectively getting where you need to be. The idea is just literally like a little trip. For we all stumble in many ways, but that little trip keeps you from doing what you were intended to do. Even though it's not this fatal fall, it is something that trips us up. For we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he's a perfect man. Now, this idea of perfection there is not like Jesus, or is not like without sin or without fault. It's really from this idea of a synonym that means mature and complete. So it says, if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect, mature man. He is complete, able also to bridle his whole body. Verse 3, "If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also, though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs." Here's what I love about this. Like, he's using horses and he's using ships. You think about this day, what is happening. Horses were a huge utility animal. It helped them farm, it helped them transport, it helped them do different things. Ships, transport, fishing, all the stuff. Like, this was a prevalent idea to see on a body of water a ship. It was a prevalent idea to see a horse on land. And he is saying this, in a horse, if you put this small bit in their mouth, we guide it wherever it wants to go. If you look at a ship, they are large and are driven by strong winds, but it is the very small rudder, and it's basically, it's wherever the will of the pilot directs. So the bridle involved with a horse and the rudder that's involved with a ship, these are not the engines. They are a directional tool. And in the same way, the tongue is not the engine, the heart, the will, the soul, the invisible, your mind. The invisible is the engine, like what Matthew was saying, is out of the heart the mouth speaks. But the tongue is this directional tool that literally gives us the ability to formulate speech and to talk in such a way that we have to be mindful of what's happening in the invisible in the mind. And then we have to look at what James is saying, because of what was happening in the early church and the way that it's in context with us now, is we have to look at the fact that, hey, we've got to make sure that we are able to control this. Because in order to be perfect, in order to become mature and complete, we've got to be able to tame this actual organ, which is the tongue, this actual muscle, this thing in our mouth, the tongue. It says, verse 5, so also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. It is not the engine, but it is a directional tool. Thinking about this, it starts out with, hey, talking about teachers. And then, it looks at the fact that it immediately turns to everybody now of listen, no one's off the hook. Everyone, you need to look at yourself and evaluate. Are you perfect? And by that, are you mature and complete as a follower of Jesus? Basically, are you a fully devoted follower of Christ? Is the way that the invisible leads to the visible, the audible and the visible to the action and the actual ability to speak, is it evidence of a mature and complete following of Jesus Christ? So it goes on, it says this in verse 5, it continues in verse 5, how great a force, another analogy. I love that James is using pictures because I feel like, one, I love it, and two, I feel like he knew he was talking about, and he was talking to people that would get these references. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. Man, when you start think about, when you read about this, you kind of see that one, speech is essential to what makes us human. God, when you look in Genesis, he spoke into existence, all the stuff that we talk about, and you look in Matthew and you look at what Jesus said about speech and stuff about that. And you look in verses 5 and 6 and you realize that our words, what happens from the invisible to the visible and the audible, our words have the power to do unbelievable damage. And our words also have the ability to build up unbelievably. And when it is at the damaging, the destructive portion, James calls it hell inspired, set on fire by hell. And that word there, it's not like trying to be cute and all this kind of stuff. It's literally this picture that derives from the piles that were outside the city, where they would put decomposing bodies and animals that were there with the burn and the stench. And the idea there of physically relating to an eternal punishment of hell, it's not trying to be cute. James is literally saying that this place that is hell, that the tongue in its destruction is set on fire by that. It gives you an idea of how serious James is. He's not just going, try not to hurt people with your speech. He's literally saying, the tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. You think about when my wife and I got married, she got a white dress, I got a tux. That white dress, the thing is, she's got to get in the dress and then be careful as she's eating and everything like that. You don't want to get anything on it, because let's just say that you do stain the dress. You've got all this incredible whiteness, but everyone's eyes are going to be drawn to the stain. The stain is going to stand out. The stain is going to be noticeable. The stain is going to basically color, to some extent, the way that we look at the dress as a whole. And this is trying to help us understand this. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body. So in a destructive pattern with your speech, in a way that where your speech is not mature, and it is not complete, and it is not evidence of a fully devoted follower, or being a fully devoted follower of Christ. And if your speech does bring malicious paint, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. Just the idea there that the tongue, I saw one commentary that said, the tongue is a world of evil. Something that's capable of great good, but something that is capable of incredible evil. The invisible and what happens in the heart is evidenced by the way that we audibly and visibly are able to form words and to bring those forward. Verse 7, for every kind of beast and bird or of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind. Now, obviously, we just talked about how they're animals that are seemingly never going to be able to be tamed. Now, can God tame them? Yes. It's making the point in verse 8, though, that even though that you're able to tame all this creation, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. Man, when I think about the words or the phrases restless evil and deadly poison, I don't know if you've ever seen someone that couldn't calm down. I don't know if you've ever seen someone who was not able to stop moving. Now, that's me a lot of times. My legs tend to always moving. Even in this moment, I notice that I like rock back and forth. A lot of times I do this. If you ever notice, I do this to my glasses a bunch. I fix my hat a bunch. I do this a lot. These are these restless things that are in me, and I'm always moving and doing something. And that's one thing. But there's also, like, you've ever seen a kid that just cannot sit still. The idea that movement has to happen, and that movement is something that everybody is aware of. And so the tongue is in its destructive state. It is a restless, that thing with frenetic energy, evil, set on fire by, and the picture there is actually what they're trying to help us understand about hell. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. Verse 9, with it we bless our Lord and Father. Now think about this. The tongue, when it's not tamed, when the tongue is not fully devoted to Christ, when it's not bringing forth evidence of what. Now, again, let me just make sure that we understand what this is not saying. Again, this is kind of like when we talked about in James 1, when we were looking at James 1 and then the verses between like 19 and 27. This is not an indication of what we're talking about with profanity. This is not an indication of what we're talking about with actual certain words. Now, there is, obviously those words can bring pain used in contexts, and those words can be used in ways that are malicious, and just like any word can be used potentially in the way that you use it to show a lack of fully devotion to Christ. What this is saying, though, is not specific about that kind of thing, about profanity or certain things like that. What this is saying here is restless evil, full of deadly poison, with the destructive nature of the tongue. When it is destructive, when it comes from a place of not being complete and not being perfect, complete and mature, and not evidence of a fully devoted or a wholeheartedly devotion to God. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. This has been me most of my life. I love to talk, first of all, but one of the greatest pains in my life has been the things that people say to me. There are things in my life from middle school and high school and college and seminary and things from the last 2 years that stick out. There's something that someone said to me 9 years ago in a passing remark, and I can tell you verbatim what they said to me because it stung with me and it's still painful to me. What's hard about sharing that is that I know that there are people out there where they have the same story, but I'm the one that said something hurtful. I'm the one that said something 20 years ago, 15 years, 10 years ago, within the last 2 years, potentially within the last 7 days, to my wife maybe, to my kids, that I've said things that are painful, that were restless evil and full of deadly poison. My tongue was not tamed. And with that same one, as I try to bless our Lord and Father through what we're trying to do with the collective and the way that I speak about Him and the way to speak about how we want to be an authentic community, that engage communities to authentically connect to Him and to each other, with it, I bless the Lord and Father, hopefully, but with it, I curse people who are made in the likeness of God. With it, I bring people in, I'm using my tongue directionally. And I'm not in that, I'm not trying to help anyone get toward Christian maturity. I'm not working to get myself toward Christian maturity. If anything, I'm making it easier to pull further and further away. Verse 10, from the same mouth come blessing and cursing, my brothers, these things ought not to be so. Verse 11, does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water. The idea is this. Look, are we going to bless it? Are we going to do things that bless the Lord and Father, bless our Lord and Father, that bless God, that bless Jesus? Or are we going to curse people who are made in the likeness of God? Blessing or cursing, I have written in my Bible here from years ago, blessing or cursing, one will win out. And there's so many times in my life where I've let the invisible of what is going on in my heart and in my mind affect the way that it literally sent all that energy to my mouth. And instead of using that same heart and mind to filter and to be mature and to calm down and to not say it, I vomit it forward. I spew it forward and physically use my tongue to form words that have brought pain or that have not represented someone who is fully devoted to God and to Christ. Or I have allowed my words to be used in such a way that when those things come out, the speech that is so essential to what we are, that it has literally stained who I am. And the idea that it is set fire by hell is one of those dramatic ways to look at what James is writing and saying that they are taking this seriously in the life of the church, taking it seriously in the life of the early church, and taking it seriously in the life of those individuals that were making up this new thing called church. So what does that do for us? Well, immediately, all 12 of these passages should make us get very curious. Immediately, we should start getting curious and be like, okay, is the way that I use my words perfect? Is it mature and complete? Is it evidence of a wholly devoted, a whole devotion to Christ? Is it to be built up? Is it in a way that the bit in the mouth and the rudder on a ship, is it directionally leading us toward a wholly devoted life to Christ? Or is it leading us in a way that does not show that devotion, or actually leading us away? And are we doing the same thing to someone else? Are we hurting them, hindering them from being a fully devoted follower of Christ because of the things that we say and the pain that we bring and with the words that we say? What we say comes out of our hearts, and the tongue reflects what's in our heart and mind. Again, the invisible is affecting the audible and the visible. Now, I'm not exactly sure why James doesn't talk more about the Matthew passage. I'm not exactly sure why he doesn't talk about more about the internal, about the fact that our mind plays a part into it. But what I believe is that James is trying to help us identify, look at your words. Don't get lost. Look at your words and what you are saying. And let's make sure that they are evidence of the devotion that you say that you have with Christ. Let's make sure that if they are going to be a bit in the mouth like a horse, in the mouth of a horse, if it's going to be like on the rudder of a ship, if they're not the engine, but they are directional tools, let's make sure that the direction is toward Christ. Look at this kind of idea of, this idea of the tongue being a fire. Looking at this idea that it in its destructive state, it is set on fire by hell. That it can be a restless evil full of deadly poison. It can be used to curse people who are made in the likeness of God. As we look at this passage today, it is a very practical passage, not just for the early church. It is a very practical passage for us right now to evaluate, how do I use my words? How am I using them? Am I using them in a way that are like deadly poisons? Am I using them in a way that are like restless evils? Am I using them in a way that's like a fire set on fire by hell? Am I using them in such a way that the bit in the mouth or the rudder on a ship, that directionally I am not getting any closer to God or showing evidence of getting closer to God because of the words that are coming out of my mouth? Am I, as we look at this, especially, verse 1, look at it very heavily if you're a teacher, but then in verse 2, for we all stumble in many ways. Are we using them in such a way that for ourselves or for others, that we are stumbling, that we are tripped up on our journey to become a fully devoted follower of Christ? It is capable of great good and great evil. And as we evaluate today, are you willing, am I willing to evaluate the way that as words come into the invisible and as things come into the invisible, the way that I tame the process by which my tongue says those things, the way that I talk. Gossip can be that. Facts can be that. Facts can be these things that we say that we don't really need to be sharing with people. The way that the names that we call people, the things that we even say on social media, we've got, even though it's not with our tongue, like we've got to be very, very careful that we don't allow our tongue, these things that we say, to be a restless evil or a deadly poison. We want them to be something that not only leads us to continue the journey of being a fully devoted follower of Christ, but help others come on that journey as well. We've got to be able to evaluate. And I'm going to be honest with you before we get into the chat and before we get into you discussing. This is one of the hardest things about following Jesus for me. One of the hardest things is me watching my mouth. It is incredibly hard. There's always things that I want to say. There's always things that I want to talk about that make me look better and make other people look worse. There's always things that I want to do in defense of myself that potentially bring a lot of shame and a lot of pain on other people. And what's bad is I can be really good at it. And so I feel like I've learned and I've been on the journey of what it looks like to tame the tongue, to work on what the invisible is sending to the tongue and the way that I control and allow this directional tool to be something that is not destructive. But I am a work in progress and I struggle with it all the time. I struggled with it yesterday. I'm going to struggle with it today and I'm going to struggle with it tomorrow. But we have evidence here of the fact that if I am to be a perfect person, a person who is mature and complete, wholly devoted to God, I better work on controlling this. And I am trying and I am working on it. And I know that I will continue to. So I hope that you can have that same kind of evaluation as we as the church try to be authentic, but at the same time, do it in a way that engages people to authentically connect to each other and to God. So listen, today in the chat, today in your discussion, in your homes or wherever you're at, I pray that you will take time to get really curious with yourself and even confess to God the things that you're finding out about yourself in this idea of taming the tongue, and that it will lead you to a greater connection to God. You guys have an incredible day, an incredible discussion, and I want to thank you already for what you're going to put in the chat. You guys have an incredible time.